We haven't even talked about the thing that I assumed the intro would be about.
The vice presidential debate?
I was gonna well, we only release every like 2 weeks or so I was actually gonna talk about how Trump has COVID, but I guess that's old news already.
That is 100% old news.
Well, the vice presidential debate was fucking disaster. What is there even to say about it?
No, that's the thing. This is what all like neoliberals have been hoping for. Two people hopelessly avoiding questions and talking to each other very politely and not interrupting each other as much as Trump and Biden did.
I don't know, dude. Fucking Pence was pretty horrible.
This is like the normal politics that people want to get back to.
That's what...
And it's still that shitty.
This vice presidential debate actually revealed something to me that I think we'd all kind of known, but it was just like the best like pulling of the veil away, which is that like it actually reveals to us how shitty our politics have always been. Like, it's not even that much worse. It's just worse. It's just bad in ways that make it more obvious how bad it's always been. Because Kamala and Pence, like, this is what debates used to be like, and now we're like, this is so fucking terrible. It's like, I feel like this is just what debates have always been like.
Yes, this is boring. Nobody's yelling at each other, and nobody's being using racist dog whistles. This sucks.
I mean the bits where Pence was like, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm going to answer a different question, and then went and did it and never answered the actual question, is like, if I didn't fucking hate him so much, I would like be joking about how that's a complete Chad move, and it unironically is like a complete Chad move. But I just can't. I stand by my philosophy is that under no circumstances do you have to give it to them. Do you have to hand it to them? So I won't.
You don't have to. That's okay.
But it's kind of nice that like The Fly is like the main thing that people are reacting to and talking about, because frankly, like, Pence did kind of bowl over her in a lot of that debate.
I mean, I think the thing we're missing most here is that I think Pence was in just really unfamiliar territory. You know, he was on stage talking to a woman that wasn't his wife for like an hour and a half. And he's famously against that.
Did you read that Onion article, or at least see the headline? That was like Mike Pence instinctually directs all answers to Kamala Harris's husband in the audience.
oh, I laughed. That's really sad. That's so true though. He did speak over her a lot. That did get me kind of tight. Like,
yeah, fucking fracking.
I feel like these is how all our intros go. And like we talk about recent events, and we just go, "Oh God, we're fucked, aren't we?" Yeah.
I love these. Yeah. I love these court packing questions because it's the revert. It's like the perfect mirror of constantly asking Trump if he's going to like commit to a peaceful transition of power, because it's like, I feel like the idea is like to get them on record not being straightforward about their intentions, but what's really happening is that you're just normalizing the idea that they have the choice. And like, Democrats on the whole are pretty on board with packing the court at this point, even like moderate Democrats, as far as I can see. Like, if Joe Biden was like, we're gonna add 4 justices to the court, like, I think he would receive pretty broad support from the Democratic base for that. I mean, he won't, but I would love to be proved wrong. I mean, that would be incredible.
I mean,
and it would have to be 4. You can't add 2, because that wouldn't even give you the majority.
Oh God, yeah. I was confused for a second there. Then I realized the abysmal state we're in. But like as we both know, there's no guarantee that just because a large amount of his base supports it, Joe Biden will agree to something.
True. I do think I think that he's probably not going to pack the court at all, like under no circumstance, if they can block Amy Coney Barrett from being affirmed before it's like too late. if they can like stop her from being on the bench and we end up with a 5-4, then I doubt we'll see a packing. I think it's only in the event that we end up with a 6-3 that there's a chance of it.
Yeah. Trump could die and Amy Coney Barrett will still likely be appointed as a Supreme Court justice. Fingers
I don't know.
Crossed.
We'll see.
I'm hoping.
We'll see because
I can't wait till Trump.
Now
Do
it's
you
like
realize how? Do you realize how incredible of a day that's going to be? Okay, I hate that I'm saying this.
I'm gonna bleep out.
Twitter's gonna go off.
I'm gonna bleep
Twitter.
I'm gonna bleep
I'm gonna
out.
take the day off of work.
Trump. You're gonna say it's gonna sound like I can't wait until bleep.
You know you can get banned on Twitter for saying that you want Trump to die.
Yeah, I'm not gonna fuck with that. I'm gonna keep it nice and clean on that regard.
I mean, I'm taking care of the posting.
Because, quite frankly, COVID doesn't care what I think anyway.
That's true. Alright, do you want to start talking about the episode? I'm gonna take Linus and put him outside because he's being noisy.
And then you can come back. Yeah, we can start talking about the episode.
Okay, great.
I know I've said this to you over text already in the lead up to this, but I fucking hate talking about the Soviet Union. I absolutely... You know what it's like? It's like talking about Israel, where like you're looking at this...
I love talking about Israel.
No, I fucking hate it. Because you're looking at this thing and you're like, wow, there's a lot of things here that that could really do with some good faith criticism. You know, there's a lot of really bad stuff going on. And then some like right-wing dipshit is putting so much effort into propagandizing and fear-mongering about this thing to the point because they have an agenda that goes beyond just criticizing the actual like material state of the thing that they're looking at, of the Soviet Union or of Israel. And they're trying to like, because like when right-wingers criticize the Soviet Union, they're not like trying to point out specific flaws with like the state. They want to put any kind of like collectivized, working class oriented politics outside the realm of consideration. And that's why you end up with these absurd like numbers of like, 100 million people died over the course of the Soviet Union's life. And it's like, that is like the Soviet Union at its birth had 150 million people living in it, and at its death 300 million people in it. And they had 100 million like that's just obviously absurd. But and like when you actually like look at the numbers, you're talking about death figures that are still in the fucking millions, and in any other circumstance, like pointing out that Stalin is responsible for 3 million deaths sounds like you are saying a bad thing about him. But in the context of like literally of like reducing that by like reducing 100 billion by 97% to get to that 3 million figure, it looks like you're sucking him off, saying 3 million people died. Like I just can't even have like a straightforward fucking conversation about it. And it's the thing with, and it's yeah, it reminds me of what it's like to talk about Israel, where it's like, hey, I think that like these Orthodox Jewish settlements in the West Bank are bad, but there's a guy next to you who is like, yeah, like the protocols of the Elders of Zion, QAnon fucking shit. I actually have no idea how QAnon feels about Israel, because it's always evangelicals are complicated about.
You can't tell. That's the thing. You can't tell how QAnon feels about everything, because everything is interpreted from these incredibly vague, like one sentence, air quotes drops.
Yeah.
That people. Oh my god, watching people like pick apart like Trump tweets to try and turn them into like QAnon, like align them to QAnon drops is fucking. It's literally like English algebra that has no rules and makes no sense. It's incredible the length of mental gymnastics people go to. It's also very sad.
Have you watched Dan Olson Folding Ideas documentary on Flat Earth and QAnon.
Oh, I didn't know that Flat Earth and QAnon were aligned.
Oh, of course they are. That's like the central thesis of it. It's called In Search of a Flat Earth, and it's the central thesis of it is basically that Flat Earth is kind of waning in popularity because the thing that Flat Earth used to do for people is now being done by QAnon, which is basically just provide a worldview that gives you free reign to do right-wing authoritarianism with no like filter and no like restrictions.
I think the thing that really gave I think QAnon is so much more powerful than Flat Earth by a long shot.
It's probably the most successful conspiracy movement in U.S. history.
Can we get a fuck Jim Watkins in the chat? Thank you.
Jim and Ron Watkins.
Do we even know? That Jim Watkins is Q? Because there is a new
podcast coming out by Jake Hanrahan, the host of Popular Front, about that. I just did ad, and I'm super excited about it. That was a plug for something we had nothing to do with, but I'm super excited about it because he's a really smart guy who's very hardworking. But
Jake Hanrahan, you said, is very good looking.
Hardworking, but I don't know what he looks like, but I imagine he does seem like a leftist, so I'm assuming he's handsome.
It's tough to tell. Okay, here's the thing about anarchists, right? Is I feel like there's two kinds of anarchists. There's like CNTFAI like fucking anarchists. There's or like Zapatistas and shit like that. Like anarchists like smash the state, blow shit up, to the extent that you need it to like take down like oppressive institutions, stuff like that. And then there's anarchists that are basically just sock dems who like use anarchist theory as like a cudgel against like authoritarian communists, but is like not really meaningfully anti-state even in like their political advocacy, because it's not like thought of as an immediate as an immediate goal. It's like a later goal, maybe, if we can do these first things first. But it's like, once you're going, oh well, we need to do other things first before we can smash the state, like I feel like you're kind of betraying the basic anarchist principle that transitory states are a dead end.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
But I feel like that like is Noam Chomsky really an anarchist? Or is Noam Chomsky a democratic socialist?
No, Noam Chomsky is seems to be a consistent proponent of electoralism, so I can't really say he's any flavor of anarchist at all.
Yeah, and it's like, and that's fine. Like we don't all have to be anarchists.
I'm certainly not an anarchist.
Yeah, I'm really not. I
100% since day one anti-cop.
Yeah. I don't really identify.
Get it twisted.
I think that I don't really identify fully with either of like the really traditional like red or black like lines. I'm generally a fan of like the trend of democratic socialism and stuff like that. Like the idea of like a roughly liberal state with socialist economic relations, the use of like the nationalization of parts of industry and the organization of the other parts in terms of co-ops, depending on the industry, generally with
just nationalized natural resources.
Resource extraction, ISPs like internet service, energy, the building of infrastructure. Most of the time, Dude, food can be a little bit complicated because some food is...
People don't realize that internet is a human right. Internet should be a human right in this day and age.
Yeah.
No one talks about that shit. Mostly because they're so obsessed with dumb shit like healthcare.
Those things are connected. Those things are connected, especially in the age of COVID. Like, if you don't have internet, then it can be harder to see your doctor because people are doing like remote visits and stuff like that. So it's all connected.
Dude, we gotta stop. We gotta start this fucking episode.
Take control of the recording now, and I'm going to start. And I'm going to start talking about.
I'm 3/4 of the way through this tall boy.
I'm going to start talking
about so fucking long in this intro.
And Reds.
Hit it.
So big thank you to Reddit user Splizzy29 for what? This is a Reddit name. It's a normal Reddit name.
It sounds like Blizzy, and that makes me laugh.
Yeah, big thank you, Splizzy, for recommending us Blackshirts and Reds to read for this current episode of We Read Theory. This one cuts a little bit against my personal beliefs a little bit and calls me out quite a bit. I don't
Challenging yourself is good, though.
Yeah.
This is growth, Mark.
Yeah. I you know, it's all in the script. I talk about where I disagree with Michael Parenti, but I did actually learn a lot from this book that has helped me to think about things a little bit more clearly, even if I don't 100% agree with his perspective. Although I think we agree more than we don't, honestly, because I think that we'll get into it.
But Mark, isn't that what leftism is all about?
Infighting?
Hating people you slightly disagree with?
Yeah. Okay.
We never introed. Like the This Is We Read Theory. Should we
you're
do
right.
that? Sorry.
Yeah,
I wasn't sure if like we were gonna do it later.
No. You're true. Welcome to We Read Theory, the podcast where we read theory so you do not have to. My name is Mark.
And I am Alex, as I always have been.
And, you know, we talked about it already, but we are reading Michael Parenti's Blackshirts and Reds. Let's get started.
Cool.
Michael Parenti's goal with Blackshirts and Reds is to recontextualize our understanding of communism in the 20th century. Communists, and particularly the Soviet Union, have been the subject of so much propaganda in the West that their mere mention often warrants a negative emotional reaction in many, if not most, Americans that rivals or even surpasses Nazi Germany. The evil Soviets are always placed in opposition to an imperfect but ultimately good capitalist West. What Blackshirts and Reds does is challenge this narrative from both ends. On the Soviet end, Parenti seeks to place many of the worst aspects of communist society in their proper context, as the results of flawed leaders in difficult times making often ruthless decisions, rather than as the results of pure evil or rank idiocy. On the Western end, Parenti is merciless in his criticism of the capitalist system, of the inequality it creates and the imperialism it necessitates. What we basically have is a reversal of the narrative we're used to, with an evil, bloodthirsty West and an imperfect but ultimately going for being good, Soviet Union. With a structure like this, it's easy to walk away from Blackshirts and Reds thinking Parenti wants you to think about the Soviet Union as uncritically as we Americans tend to think about our own country. I don't like to think Parenti is interested in doing this, though, but I have to admit that I'm projecting onto him a bit here. The way I think about the Soviet Union is it's like an old race car with some experimental design features that lost its big race, and now it sits in the dump. And for those of us who believe in the experiment at like a fundamental level, it's tempting to think we can just build it back up like it was before and give it another go. But we know this is a mistake. The race has been run and the Soviet Union lost. On the other hand, it's also tempting to say we should scrap the whole thing. The capitalist car won, so clearly it must be better. It must be made from better parts. But we know this is a mistake too. If we abandon past failures completely, then we implicitly accept the neoliberal narrative that there is no alternative. That the growing inequality, the erosion of our communities, the commodification of every human experience, and the suicidal destruction of our environment are all just things we have to live and die with.
Really quick, off the jump, as is tradition, I have not read Blackshirts and Reds.
Yeah.
But off the jump, this sounds to me like the centrist standpoint of I can criticize both sides, therefore I am intellectually ascended. Is it that?
No, Parenti is the if you take Blackshirts and Reds at its face value, then it is very much bloodthirsty, evil Western capitalists and highly flawed but ultimately good Soviets.
I'm liking this already. Let's go.
And yeah, like I said, I'm maybe a little bit. Well, I hate talking about the Soviet. Because my feelings about it are so complicated. And so what does a good engineer do? They take their broken machine and they take it apart. Which parts failed? Which parts worked as expected? Which parts actually exceeded those expectations? If this is the way you want to think about the Soviet Union, then Blackshirts and Reds is a really good place to start. It's a good book to help you get into the mindset of taking the Soviet Union seriously as a political project, which most Americans are not really accustomed to doing. I do advise that if you're planning on reading this book, that you do so with the intention of investigating some of the claims made in it, as it often goes uncited in areas that I felt needed citations. Not to say that everything that Parenti says is wrong, it's just that when you go and look into it, you might find that he's right in some places, or he's maybe oversimplifying things in other places. For example, there's this section in which Parenti lists off the casualties from a number of American military actions in the 20th century, and while the Vietnam War and various acts of regime change in Africa and Latin America do represent major atrocities committed by the United States, Parenti's handling of them hides the fact that the process of determining casualties is often rather messy and rarely results in a single clean number. And I don't say this to suggest that these were not the crimes Parenti says they were. For all I know, the numbers could be higher in truth. But the point is that I don't know where he's getting his numbers from sometimes, and that makes it tough to feel like I could actually take these numbers into a debate, into like a serious setting. But without checking them first, at least. With all that said,
I feel like to compare capitalism and communism as he's doing solely in a quantitative way as a number of deaths that resulted from it is a way oversimplification.
It's not. Well, that's just one segment of the book. He's pretty comprehensive, I would say. And with all that said, yeah.
That is fair. But also, as long as we're on the subject, guess how many people in communist Vietnam have died from the coronavirus? Just take a guess.
It's zero, right?
It's 35
35,
people.
Okay.
30 fucking 5. And in Cuba, it's like 120 people.
I know.
How fucking insane is that?
I mean, you don't have to be communist though, because I don't like.
Oh no, I'm just saying
because Hong Kong,
these communist countries are in the Western public education school of thought fucking awful, horrible, totalitarian places where there is statistically less homelessness and poverty, coincidentally, just out of nowhere. Just saying.
With all that said, Parenti is doing important work here. He's encouraging us to investigate complicated parts of history that have been simplified in American canon. He's identifying and deconstructing the double standards we too often apply to America's enemies. In many ways, he's actually doing very similar work to what Noam Chomsky is famous for, which is a bit ironic considering Parenti's apparent burning hatred for the man. And that's basically all the bets I need to hedge before going into this, so let's get into the actual text of Blackshirts and Reds. So Blackshirts and Reds is really, in many ways, more about anti-communism and its problems than it is about communism itself, although it's about both. And anti-communism can't really be fully understood without first understanding the primary tool through which anti-communist action is taken, and this tool is fascism. Fascism has a lot of definitions, each with their own situational usefulness, but for our purposes today, fascism is the capitalist's trump card. When the contradictions of capitalism begin to show themselves, when inequality grows and quality of life for the average worker decreases, support for left-wing ideologies like communism goes up. Fascism is the knife capitalists reach for to maintain their profits and privileges in the face of growing left-wing agitation. Discourse on fascism mostly serves to hide this fact, trading off between praising fascists for making the trains run on time, and, once the greatest of atrocities have already been committed, scolding fascism as an irrational ideology of hate. A material analysis of fascism reveals the truth. Let's take the two most famous fascist governments in history: Fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. In both nations, fascists rose to power in times of great economic strife and amid growing left-wing sentiment. In both nations, the fascists were funded heavily by big business owners and recruited from the smaller business-owning class, the petite bourgeoisie. Following Mussolini and Hitler's respective takeovers, their nations both took steps to reinforce divisions in the population. When we think of the Nazis, we think of racial hierarchies, gender hierarchies, and the oppression of LGBT individuals. But less often are we instructed to look at class divisions. which likewise saw themselves reinforced and augmented by fascist rule. From Parenti, quote, "In both Italy in the 1920s and Germany in the 1930s, old industrial evils, thought to have passed permanently into history, re-emerged as the conditions of labor deteriorated precipitously. In the name of saving society from the Red Menace, unions and strikes were outlawed. Union property and farm cooperatives were confiscated and handed over to rich private owners. Minimum wage laws, overtime pay, and factory safety regulations were abolished. Speed-ups became commonplace. Dismissals or imprisonment awaited those workers who complained about unsafe or inhumane work conditions. Workers toiled longer hours for less pay. The already modest wages were severely cut, in Germany by 25 to 40%, in Italy by 50%. In Italy, child labor was reintroduced." Unquote.
This is so weird. Mark, how could this be? Socialism is literally in the name National Socialism. This doesn't make any sense. I can't think critically about this, and you can't prove otherwise.
Far from earning criticism, these developments were celebrated in the American press. John Broich, in an article for Smithsonian Magazine from 2016, says, quote, "Papers ranging from the New York Tribune to the Cleveland Plain Dealer to the Chicago Tribune credit it with saving Italy from the far left and revitalizing its economy. From their perspective, the post-World War I surge of anti-capitalism in Europe was a vastly worse threat than fascism. Ironically, while the media acknowledged that fascism was a new experiment, papers like the New York Times commonly credited it with returning turbulent Italy to what it called normalcy." Unquote. Which, that's something to think about. Of course,
nugget to take home.
Of course, opinions towards the fascist regimes of Europe did sour, but only after the growing Axis powers began to threaten U.S. corporate interests. Once the war was over, and the threat of fascism against U.S. interests neutralized, the friendly disposition resumed. In fact, efforts towards denazification in the former fascist nations, now under NATO control, were largely non-existent. The Nuremberg trials saw the execution and imprisonment of a few high-ranking fascists, but a far greater number of fascists and collaborators were allowed to go free and even maintain their positions of power. Within a couple of years, conspiracy theories about the trials being Jewish plots were already popular among German conservatives. At the same time, the partisans who'd been resisting fascist rule in Italy for many years were criminalized and persecuted, often by the same people who'd done so under Mussolini. I would also be remiss not to point out that examples of the friendliness towards fascism by capitalists can be seen in the US right now, where police now regularly team up with and help fascist groups like the Proud Boys and Patriot Prayer to fight against left-wing protest movements like BLM under the guise of protecting property and maintaining law and order. So there's your modern-day reference from the text. Obviously, Parenti doesn't talk about BLM in a book from 1997. Criticisms of revolution generally involve the statement of some evil perpetrated by a communist regime that's then left to hang there. Communist crimes tend to be stated in a vacuum because the purpose is to pathologize communists as uniquely evil, uniquely violent. As the great Marxist thinker Joseph Biden famously said, quote, "Don't compare me to the Almighty, compare me to the alternative, Jack." Unquote. But the alternative is often left out of the conversation. Fidel Castro has been the subject of heavy criticism in the West, labeled as undemocratic and violent, and the implication is that there was some path Cuba could have taken that was free of death and tyranny. The reality is that Castro's revolution took power from the US-backed Batista regime, which was as violent and oppressive as they come. What of Batista's violence? Would it have been the more moral option to simply let an oppressive regime go on? Can we argue that violence invalidates one regime while implicitly endorsing the violence that would have been needed to keep the old regime in power? No. No, we can't.
Thank you for filling in that not obvious blank, Mark. I appreciate that.
Vietnam is another example. We labeled the Vietnamese communists as seeking to destroy the freedom of the Vietnamese people, but what freedom? Vietnam was a French colony before the revolution. In the struggle for its independence, the lion's share of the violence was inflicted on the Vietnamese people by the French, and then the Americans and their allies. More bombs were dropped on just 3 Southeast Asian countries in that conflict than were dropped by all participants during the Second World War combined, and we still left Vietnam under communist control. Why? Because Vietnam chose communism. The Vietnamese people died in the millions to protect their revolution. All in all, the communist regimes that took hold over many nations throughout the 20th century were often preferable to those that came before. This is true in the reverse as well. The US has replaced countless left-wing leaders in Latin America with right-wingers to protect freedom or whatever. And what happens? Well, the new leader is usually installed by a coup, which is undemocratic on its face, and often the leader who is replaced is democratically elected one. This was the case in Chile in 1973, when US-trained troops replaced democratically elected President Salvador Allende with General Augusto Pinochet. Did Pinochet make the Chilean people freer and more prosperous? God, no. He sold off Chilean resources to foreign corporations at bargain prices, making all of them a shitload of money, and then he jailed, tortured, and killed tens of thousands to maintain his power while he did it.
I mean, they were pretty free as they were falling from a helicopter, but
Free.
arguably for a much shorter time. I'm sorry.
God, Pinochet stands are actually the worst people on the internet.
Okay.
It goes Pinochet stands and then people who still say Rhodesia in 2020.
Okay, we listened to the same podcast episode about Rhodesia recently.
Wait, what are we talking about? What are you
Behind
talking
the Bastards. They just did an episode on the guy whose namesake is why Rhodesia was ever called Rhodesia.
Oh, is that Cecil Rhodes?
See, that's Cecil.
You know what's funny?
Rhodes,
I
yes.
haven't listened to that yet.
It's a doozy.
The reason why I can't stand the Rhodesia boos, I mean, apart from the fact that they're basically Nazis, is that I keep getting is because I watch history content, and we know how shitty the YouTube algorithm can be, and so I get combat footage from the Bush War videos, or that one scene from Blood Diamond where Leonardo DiCaprio says Rhodesia, and then Jennifer Connelly is don't we say Zimbabwe now? And then all the comments are fuck people who think black people should have rights because they're stupid. And I'm like, wow. YouTube has no idea where it should be sending me. It's not here.
Speaking of where we went, do you remember where we went to college, the conservative newspaper published an article about how all gay people do is fuck each other and spread AIDS under the pseudonym Pinochet?
Wait, what? No, I don't remember that happening.
I'll send you the link after this. If it's still up, it was a big controversy. I don't know how you didn't know about it. It was Pino was the first name and Shay was the last name. And at the time, I was still what I'm going to call a recovering libertarian.
I remember when we first met, or
you've already done this.
First met.
We've already been over this.
During the 2016 Democratic primary, you said that you were a libertarian and you wanted everyone to just compete in a fair arena of economics, but that you liked Bernie Sanders because he would set everyone to zero first, and then we could all compete in a fair arena. I do remember you saying that.
Okay,
but that's actually not the worst
that
opinion
school of
for a
thought.
libertarian.
I was still saying wealth equality.
Exactly.
Okay?
You were still recognizing that the system we live in today is not a meritocracy, which is important because most libertarians don't care that it's not a meritocracy. Most libertarians implicitly understand that it isn't and want to keep it that way. So the fact that you cared about that is why eventually I think you came around to having socially acceptable political views.
Yeah. Then I realized wage theft was a thing, and I was like, why did I ever listen to Gary Johnson as a
wage theft is actually
person?
the far and away the most common form of theft in the United States.
No, it's so normalized too. A very large accounting firm has recently, and this is from people of my friends who work there. An unnamed top probably 5 accounting firm in the U.S. has now discontinued paid time off.
What?
There is
is that
paid
legal?
Time off. No, it is legal. You know why? Because you can take vacation whenever you want to.
But you don't get paid.
No. You get paid for that vacation. But there's always going to be someone else who's not taking that paid vacation. And if someone's on the chopping block, it's going to be the person who's taking vacation. So no one is ever going to take vacation.
Yeah, that's how crunch works at game developers too, where it's like, you don't have to stay, but
Oh god, it hurts so bad to like think this is like completely legal and like people are just getting fucked over. It's especially during Rona.
We haven't talked about the man whose name starts with V, who will remain unnamed on this podcast just because it's too much controversy. But regardless of what you think of him, he does have a really, really good metaphor for a good analogy for like voluntarism in the free market, which is that if you're in like a plane crash and you end up as one of two survivors on a desert island, and all that's there to eat is coconuts, and you're like passed out for like a few hours before you wake up, and by the time you wake up the other person has gathered all the coconuts, and so because they've put their labor like now they own all the coconuts, and they're like, you have to suck my dick if you want any of the coconuts. And it's like, is that a voluntary situation? Am I volunteering to suck their dick, or am I being coerced? It's a very good
gonna get over
it really just
forced to
it
suck dick for coconuts. You can't make that less funny.
Okay. So now coming back into the script, it's gonna sound like I don't know where I'm talking about the coup of against Salvador Allende in Chile by the General Augusto Pinochet. And America's responsibility for crimes like this is laundered through a series of ideological assumptions. America has the right to dictate economic policy in other countries, to intervene on behalf of its national interests. The US has a responsibility to help other countries maintain their stability, and supports the advancement of the global poor as long as they don't use violent means. These assumptions have allowed the US to portray invasions and coups as defensive and pro-democratic, even though each of them is absurd on its face. The US does not have a right to dictate policy in other countries, and taking military action to do so constitutes an act of imperialism. The US interests that are supposedly protected, the stability in foreign nations, are euphemisms for the profits of American corporations. And it's plainly false that the US has any issue with violence. It employs plenty of its own violence and endorses violence against the left at every turn. Really, it's just when we fight for equality at the expense of profit that violence becomes a problem. Parenti recalls an instance of George Bush Sr. invoking the name of Martin Luther King Jr. to lecture Nelson Mandela on the virtues of nonviolence. And I'm not sure there's any image that more perfectly encapsulates the hypocrisy of capitalism in the face of human rights. Parenti is also... Yeah?
I was going to ask if there's video evidence of this so I could watch it after the episode. I would thoroughly
we could try to find
it.
If we find it, we'll link it in the description.
I'll post it on Twitter after this episode is published. Hopefully, if I remember.
So here's the thing Parenti is super famous for. He's highly critical of what he calls left anti-communism. And this is the tendency for lefties, particularly in America, to eschew all support for and association with the communist regimes of the 20th century, particularly the Soviet Union. And I want to be fair to left anti-communists here, mainly because, depending on your definition, I actually might count myself among you. The Soviet Union is a bit of a hard sell, and not just because of Western propaganda. Mass starvations, the suppression of dissidents, and general inefficiency in the production and distribution of necessary goods have all been exaggerated and removed from their proper contexts. But the fact remains that these things did happen, and the suffering associated with them is real. Parenti dedicates a full chapter of Blackshirts and Reds to good faith criticism of the Soviet Union, and we'll talk about that in a second. But first, we're going to run through his main criticisms of leftists who denounce the communist regimes. And yes, Alex.
All right. So really quick.
Yeah.
Before we totally move on.
Yeah.
You keep talking about this left anti-communism. Is that I'm reminded of those three arrows surrounded by a circle.
Yes, that's exactly correct.
It's like an iron front.
The
or
iron
something
front,
like
yeah.
that. Yeah. Is that the kind of political leaning that Parenti falls into?
Exactly what he's talking about. Yes. That kind of thing. So we're talking
this
about
is so validating.
Remember again,
hitting the nail right on the head like this.
Vosh is a great example of a left anti-communist in that if someone brings up the Soviet Union, he'll go like, yeah, fuck the Soviet Union. Like, I don't give a shit. Like, I don't consider the Soviet Union to be something that, like, is based on the same ideals that, like, I hold. And, like, this is mainly, like, an optics thing. Because I've seen him talk in more detail, like, about, like, the Soviet Union. But the fact that you're doing it for optics is still part of the problem.
Wait, I feel
according
like
to Parenti,
okay, not to like talk about Parenti at all or like anti-communism or anything, but I feel like Vosh, the guy who we're talking about, the guy who does like 4-hour debates, just wants to gloss over this for like optics. I kind of that seems kind of
well, he's all I mean his whole thing is optics. That's like why he does
3.5 hours of fucking optics.
Well, I mean,
I'm a little skeptical,
his whole thing, but yeah, he's very he talks about optics a lot.
God damn. Okay. Let's just move on.
We don't have to get into it.
This is a dead end.
I'm broadly speaking, like, we won't get into it. I'm more positive about him than you are, but
it's only because I'm a Assam Piker stan.
So, firstly, Parenti identifies a rank hypocrisy in leftists who consider the Soviets to be beyond rehabilitation, but who regularly align themselves with the Democratic Party as a necessary compromise. In Parenti's words, quote, "Left anti-communists find any association with communist organizations morally unacceptable because of the crimes of communism. Yet many of them are themselves associated with the Democratic Party in this country," referring to the United States, "either as voters or as members, apparently unconcerned about the morally unacceptable political crimes committed by leaders of that organization. Under one or another Democratic administration, 120,000 Japanese Americans were torn from their homes and livelihoods and thrown into detention camps. Atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki with an enormous loss of innocent life. The FBI was given authority to infiltrate political groups. The Smith Act was used to imprison leaders of the Trotskyist Socialist Workers' Party, and later on leaders of the Communist Party for their political beliefs. Detention camps were established to round up political dissidents in the event of a national emergency. During the late 1940s and 1950s, 8,000 federal workers were purged from the government because of their political associations and views, with thousands more in all walks of life witch-hunted out of their careers. The Neutrality Act was used to impose an embargo on the Spanish Republic that worked in favor of Franco's fascist legions. Homicidal counterinsurgency programs were initiated in various third world countries, and the Vietnam War was pursued and escalated. And for the better part of a century, the congressional leadership of the Democratic Party protected racial segregation and stymied all anti-lynching and fair employment bills." Unquote. I don't think Parenti is saying that tactical alliances with liberal capitalist organizations should never occur. I think he's arguing that to allow for a tactical alliance with capitalists, but not with communists, even when both are guilty of heinous crimes, represents a concession to capitalism, which is ultimately what leftists should work to avoid. A common argument that I hear from leftists who fully denounce the Soviet Union is that it's bad optics. There's obvious validity to this, but I'm always skeptical of optics-based arguments. Choosing not to advocate your beliefs because you think people already disagree with them is just admitting defeat. And when optics precludes us from advocating the ideas at the very center of our ideology, then we cease to be a political movement at all. I'm not arguing that we shouldn't criticize or even denounce the Soviet Union, just that I find the optics angle pretty unconvincing. Criticism should be based on facts and convictions, not on the misconceptions we assume others believe in.
This sounds like a real Ben Shapiro argument right here. We're going to take apart the Soviet Union and make it beautiful with facts and logic.
Another trend in left anti-communism that Parenti identifies is the tendency to deny that the Soviet bloc ever represented any true form of socialism. They argue that because the workers didn't directly and democratically control the means of production, that the Soviet Union was nothing more than a state capitalist enterprise. Parenti's response is that the Soviet Union and the various authoritarian communist regimes of the 20th century are the result of a survivor bias. An undeniable fact about installing socialism is that it's a massive challenge. By design, communism makes powerful people scared of you and hate you, and it's widely understood by leftists of all stripes that no socialist program is complete without a plan for withstanding attacks from foreign powers and internal reaction. What left anti-communists are doing is denouncing the only examples of socialist revolutions that have actually managed to hold the line for some period of time. Take Stalin's 5-year plans, for example. These efforts took the Soviet Union from an agrarian backwater to an industrial powerhouse in the span of a couple decades at incredible cost to human life. Parenti frames this choice on the Soviets' part as breaking a few million eggs to make a really big and important omelet. Taken by itself, this undertaking looks like a massive waste of human life, done purely to fuel Stalin's megalomania. But let's put it in the context of the rising threats to the Soviet Union's existence. At the very beginning of the Soviet project, before the Civil War was even over, the Reds saw themselves invaded by a coalition of 14 nations, including all of the major Allied powers of World War I. That the Soviet Union would need to be highly industrialized and internally free of division just to stay alive in the presence of so many enemies was taken as fact, and this assumption turned out to be correct. When the Nazis invaded, the Soviet Union was ultimately able to push them back and win because of the decisions Stalin had made in years prior. And other factors, of course. I'm not just saying it was just Stalin's decisions, but without that industrialization effort, I don't think the Soviet Union would have been able to withstand. And I think that's a pretty self-evident point. Parenti is actually largely on board with most of the things the left anti-communists want in an ideal situation. The problem is that communists find themselves always in the worst of situations by design, by siding with the least powerful against the most powerful. Democratic socialists seem to do the best job of making life better for their people. Look at Evo Morales in Bolivia. But as we've also seen with this same example, that when socialist leaders decline the iron fist for themselves, someone else's iron fist often comes in to destroy them. As much as it makes me uncomfortable, I think Parenti has a point here. I often worry about the future of the left when I think about how it will react to new left-wing political projects. If the left were to make any significant progress in the US, for example, it would need to wield power and make difficult decisions, otherwise it'll just end up undermined at every turn. I'm not sure that many leftists have the stomach for that, and that worries me because the forces of reaction very much do have the stomach for it, and an insatiable hunger, even.
Mark, I feel kind of dirty right now. You're kind of making me feel like a bit of a tanky here. In a very good way.
Well, tankies are... I don't think that having a balanced view of the Soviet Union makes you a tanky. I think a tanky is someone... I think you become a tanky when you start employing conspiratorial thinking, when... My rule about calling something Western propaganda is that you actually have to be able to demonstrate how it's wrong, and stuff like that. Because, like, a lot of the times I feel like there are people who just hear something bad about the Soviet Union and go, oh, well, you can't trust the Western media. And it's like, we know we can't trust it because we find the problems with it. And in general, like, my opinion is that propaganda tends to be something that you can see through if you're looking for it, and it generally relies on people not really taking too hard of a look at it. So on the whole, if you can't really find evidence that a piece of information is like a lie, is propaganda, then I don't really think you have a leg to stand on calling it a lie or calling it just like pure ideology, pure propaganda, just because it's convenient to your enemies, just because it's convenient to the people that are saying it. I don't think that's enough evidence. And I think that to me, like, a tanky is defined by that tendency to assume that anything that is convenient for the West is Western propaganda and therefore a lie, and to also align yourself with anyone who is anti-US regardless of who they are specifically, regardless of whether or not they have anything ideologically in common with you.
That's the problem I kind of see with, like, DPRK stands.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Like, I find it hard to find an unbiased view of North Korea. It's really hard, but like anyone, like I'm sorry, but like every time like there's like a firsthand account of it, it's someone like risking their lives to get away from it. Like I can't argue with that. And they're obviously not this huge industrial rich power. So I'm kind of unconvinced.
And the DPRK is another one of those fucking countries where it's like, wow, look at these really obvious problems that are there for everyone to see, and we could could pretty much like denounce this country without having to like tell any kind of lies, and yet people still like tell lies and shit, and like exaggerate like what is already, or also like they like try to pathologize like Kim Jong-un like doing very obvious things that anyone would do in his position, like trying to build nukes. Like, of course he's trying to build nukes. If he wasn't trying to build nukes, we would have invaded and leveled the country by now. If he why?
What resources does North Korea have? There's no way we would do that.
Like it's not ridiculous that he's paranoid about everyone in his government. There's probably like 1 million fucking spies in his government and people waiting to take him down. Like, because that's how we talk about North Korea. We talk about it like a country that it would be good to at any point take out their government. So like, I'm not like a North Korea like proponent like or anything like that. I just, the way that people talk about it is so weird and so uninterested in like actually looking at it from a material and like practical perspective.
I feel like North Korea is so much more valuable to, I don't know, the ruling US class as some kind of boogeyman, pie in the sky, scary country than taking it over and stripping it of any natural resources or freedomizing it or whatever, like they do to Latin American countries. But like, there's nothing there for them. There's nothing to be gained.
Really, the big thing about like invading North Korea would be like putting pressure on like China and Russia's borders. I think really more China, because it has a very small border with Russia that's pretty far away from anything of use.
Yeah, no pun intended. They're not gonna poke the bear with Russia.
It's like
they already have with China, obviously.
It's like, yeah, North Korea, like I wouldn't want to live there. It sounds like a horrible place to live, frankly. Really happy I don't live there, and I would like to see a political change there, obviously, towards democratization, actual democratization, not like the fucking fake shit that we do in like Chile and in Bolivia. Like actual democratization and actual more worker control of like their environment, of like their workspace and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, like, North Koreans have way more justification of being scared of the United States than we do of North Korea. Like, North Korea is nothing to us. It is not a threat to us at all.
I was looking up U.S. military budgets today. With a $640 military budget and more bases in other countries than
$640?
What's up?
$640 military budget?
640 billion. Did I say billion?
I don't know. I was confused, but
over $600 billion military budget. Only because Trump posted a video today of saying, I inherited a military that was depleted and poor. And then I looked up the military budget in 2016 and it was 560 billion or something like that.
We could like deconstruct the way that we talk about like the military and the empire and like our foreign policy, but honestly, we will never do it as well as Citations Needed does it. They do an amazing job. Oh my god, we are so fucking off topic now. We're at
this episode has been going for so long.
Do you know how long into the recording we are? You know how long into the recording we are? An hour and 20. Yeah. Okay. We need to get through the end of this episode. I'm gonna cut out a lot of that North Korea conversation.
Oh please, okay. I don't need reactionaries in my DMs again.
Yeah. So far, Parenti has been very charitable to the Soviet Union. So let's take a detour through some of the inherent structural flaws of the communist system that Parenti has identified. Across the board, the central planning of the Soviet economy created alternative problems on the other end. While it was really good for ensuring that the military needs of the nation were met, it often fell short when it came to meeting the needs of the citizens. The command economy was largely based on production quotas, which meant that workers were not incentivized to go beyond their basic requirements. This is, of course, a good thing in some respects. One of the problems of capitalism the communists identify is the tendency to overwork and overproduce, something that would be less likely when there's an upper limit on how much you will actually be rewarded for doing extra work. But in the Soviet Union, this resulted in widespread inefficiency. Resources that had their prices set low were often wasted. There was little incentive to explore new technologies. The whole structure of the command economy imbued managers and bureaucrats with power, which motivated them to keep things generally as they were when they could. Far from totalitarian, the Soviet economy suffered from a serious lack of oversight and control. These shortcomings paved the way for a romanticization of capitalism among the Soviet population, and particularly the intelligentsia. Capitalism is generally really good at showing you the stuff and sweeping the costs under the rug. According to Parenti, positive feelings towards capitalism increased at the tail end of the Soviet Union's existence because people thought they would get cool new luxury products, which is a fine thing to want, but they didn't realize that it would cost them all the benefits of the Soviet welfare state, the guaranteed housing, employment, and healthcare. Many had previously left the Soviet Union for the West and already discovered the nature of this trade-off. Quoting Parenti, "Not everyone romanticized capitalism. Many of the Soviet and Eastern European emigres who had migrated to the United States during the 1970s and 1980s complained about this country's poor social services, crime, harsh work conditions, lack of communitarian spirit, vulgar electoral campaigns, inferior educational standards, and the astonishing ignorance that Americans had about history," which frustrates the shit out of me too. They discovered they could no longer leave their jobs during the day to go shopping, that their employers provided no company doctor when they fell ill on the job, that they were subject to severe reprimands when tardy, that they could not walk the streets and parks late at night without fear, that they might not be able to afford medical services for their family or college tuition for their children, and that they had no guarantee of a job and might experience unemployment at any time." Unquote. Chapters 6 and 7 of Blackshirts and Reds are entitled "The Free Market Paradise Goes East, Parts 1 and 2. They describe the effects of the fall of the Soviet Union and subsequent spreading of capitalism to formerly communist nations. Communist, I just did the JonTron thing. To the formerly communist nations of Eastern Europe. There are a lot of exact numbers in the book itself, but honestly, it's not really that controversial, even amongst capitalists, to recognize that the transition from communism to capitalism in the East was an unmitigated disaster. Did the transition make people freer? Maybe if you were a business owner. If you were a worker, you were working longer hours for lower pay and actually had to deal with the risk of unemployment since you were no longer guaranteed a job by the state. Street crime, organized crime, unemployment, suicide, spousal abuse, all of these problems were significantly more widespread in the decade following the fall of the Soviet Union than in the decade preceding it. The rush of Western influence in the 90s is often credited with bringing democracy to the former communist nations, but did it? Sure, democratic institutions were allowed to exist when they produced the result the West wanted, but in Albania and Bulgaria, where the communists won in free and fair elections, they were beset by foreign interference and forced to resign. They were replaced undemocratically by conservative governments who then stripped the left of its political rights. In Russia itself, Boris Yeltsin took advantage of US interference, killed demonstrators, and undermined democracy to take power, all for the purpose of expanding capitalist markets. And we're about to finish up, but I do want to bring up a problem that I had with this book. In many ways, it really, really reminded me of how some of my least favorite kinds of Americans talk about American history. You know, the most famous atrocities are tacitly admitted to, but not fully reckoned with. They're kind of explained away with moral relativism and deferment to material conditions. When Parenti addresses the Ukrainian famine, for example, he largely hand-waves it with a statement about poor material conditions brought on by outside forces. And it just called to mind the way that the Bengal famine is hand-waved by Churchill sycophants. On top of that, some atrocities that I would have liked to see addressed, such as the destruction of the Aral Sea and the crushing of the Ukrainian anarchists, go without mention completely. Now, I get what Parenti is getting at, but I do have a discomfort with just admitting that a socialism that grants people economic freedom can't also grant political freedom without risking its very existence. To just give up on such a central aspect of the socialist ideal as impractical is, for me, an admission that socialism is itself a poor project to undertake. But that puts me in a tough spot, because what Parenti is talking about, the US intervention, the forces of reaction, these are realities. So here's where I'm at. As leftists in the US and in Canada and in the UK and in Germany, we have the power and the responsibility, maybe not the power, but we have the responsibility to resist our nation's tendencies to brutalize socialism abroad. The Vietnam War was not won purely through the military victories of the Vietnamese people. The war itself was politically untenable back home as well. If the American people can respond to their own country's imperialism at every turn, in the same way we responded to the killing of George Floyd, then maybe the US would have to weigh its options a bit more carefully. And maybe this political project can actually have some room to breathe.
God, I would so love to protest with angry veterans
against U.S. imperialism, against never-ending wars in the Middle East. I would love nothing more. As a quick plug to something I have no financial but only emotional interest in, if any of our listeners want to hear more about the Forever War from the perspective of veterans and West Point graduate, I would listen to the podcast in its entirety, end to end. Eyes Left by Mike Preisner and Spencer Rapone. They do a great job interviewing former veterans and just people who are involved in the war and really affected for the rest of their lives negatively as a result of it, unfortunately. But it fucking incredible. Sorry to go off on a tangent.
The spectrum of workers to just like complete chud bootlickers goes soldiers, MPs, and then just regular police.
Yeah, I think the best remedy to anything here is being angry and staying angry. Apathy.
Yeah.
What's up?
I'm sorry. There was one thing that I wanted to bring up, which is that I actually looked into some Pew polls, and Parenti talks about how immediately after the fall of the Soviet Union, people were really, really positive about capitalism and democracy. And I actually looked at some Pew polls from 2011, which I'll link in the description as well, that show a really marked decrease in the faith in these institutions as the years have gone on. So I think that that's something to think about. But I'll link that in the description.
Are there specific institutions you're referring to?
No, it's across a bunch of countries. It's like Latvia and hold on, I actually have it up somewhere. Where are we? Do I? Is this the Pew? Are these the Pew polls? No.
Bring that up on the screen, Jamie.
Oh no! I think I found it. Yes, pewresearch.org. So approval of change to democracy and capitalism in Ukraine was 72% approval. In 2011, 35%. In Lithuania, 75% in 1991. 20 years later, that's 52%. And in Russia, 61% in 1991 to 50 in 2011. That's changed to multi-party system as opposed to a single-party system. Change to market economy is in an even worse state. Lithuania was 76%, now 45, or not now 40. In 2011 was 45. Ukraine was 52% in 91, 34 in 2011, and in Russia 54 in 91 and 42 in 2011. So we're seeing decreases across the board. And also in all three of those nations, people generally believe that the changes since 1991 have predominantly benefited politicians, and then business owners, and then relatively few people believe that ordinary people have benefited from the changes at 11 in Ukraine, 20 in Lithuania, 26% in Russia. So that's just a couple of polls. But there's a bunch of interesting information in polls in this article, which I will link in the description, along with the Smithsonian Mag article that I quoted earlier.
Perfect.
All right. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Fucking no. You
sure?
We've gone off on so many tangents here. I don't know how this is going to be edited down.
The history episodes are always long, though. That's true. That's just how it is.
Always sparks interesting discussion.
Yeah.
Can I plug real quick?
Please do plug.
Oh my god. Okay. If you have a Twitter, I would highly suggest following us at We Read Theory Pod. I would also highly suggest DMing us. I would also suggest sending me memes and validation saying, Alex, your tangents are funny. Your podcast is amazing. You're handsome, even though I've never seen your face. You're a beautiful man. We accept all of that. And if you want to spark a real discussion among fellow We Read Theory listeners, I would go to r/We Read Theory Pod on Reddit and
25 subscribers and counting and Holy growing shit. Every day. And not every day, because we don't actually get a new subscriber every day. Because
please. I mean,
But please subscribe.
As an average, it's more than one new subscriber a day.
The fewer of you there are on the subreddit, the more likely it is that you'll get a long-winded answer from me or Alex about a theory question that you ask. So get in while it's hot, because
that is true. This episode was born out of
you guys think this
question
small-time podcaster thing is going to last for us? No. We are going straight to the top.
Straight to the moon, baby.
To the top. We are surpassing Citations Needed. We are surpassing BTB. We are surpassing Chapo Trap House. We are on our way to the fucking top.
Yeah, even though we don't have a Patreon or anything, or any sort of funding or ads or anything like that, straight to the top, baby.
Straight to the top, baby.
Yeah, we're gonna go right past the Patreon and start a commune, and then
and taxing
really
people.
Right after that a coup.
A coup.
I'm gonna coup the ATF.
We are going to
take the guns that they've seized for myself.
We are going to take over an area roughly equivalent to the size of New Hampshire in the middle of the kind of Great Lakes region, and we're going to start a workers' industrial republic. Subscribe.
please just reach out with questions, comments, concerns, shit posting on r/WeReadTheoryPod on Reddit. Reach out to Mark on his cell phone at 347. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my god.
All right. Do you hear the background right now?
I do hear that. It's okay. It's the outro.
All right. So where I live, there's a large Jewish population, and they are evangelizing by playing dance music out of an RV right now and going around the block.
Don't tell De Blasio.
Don't tell De Blasio? Is there a noise?
He has a long-standing bad relationship with the Hasidim of New York City.
Man, I feel bad for him because they seem like a pretty powerful entity right now. They're fucking lit outside my window right now.
Dude, yeah. I'm not gonna get too specific, but I have a person who's important to me in my life, who has at times lived in a part of the city that has a lot of Hasidim, and they party so much and so late and so often, and it does actually seem very fun.
Yeah. That I party.
But I'm from a Reformed Jewish family, so Orthodox and Hasidic Jews are our natural enemies.
And on that note, if I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Love you guys.
Get the fuck out of here. All right.
I'm going to stop recording.
Yeah, me too.